Journalist who describes herself as a Christian survivor of the civil war between Lebanese Christians and Muslims in the 1970s. She uses those experiences to support her profile of Muslims and Islamic institutions in her book, Because They Hate. She speaks at the Joint Forces Staff College in Norfolk, Virginia. This is about 50 minutes.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel Landesh, and I will be facilitating this afternoon's discussion. Today we are pleased to have Brigitte with us to speak about the Mideast situation. She's a former anchor for the World News, the Arabic evening news broadcast for Mideast television, seen throughout Israel, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. She's covered the Israeli withdrawal from central Lebanon, the Israeli security zone, and the Palestinian uprising in the West Bank and Gaza. Her work is of international scope, bringing her in contact with world figures such as Margaret Thatcher, George H. Bush Sr., Ishaq Rabin, Shimon Peres, and Ariel Sharon. Mrs. Gabriel owns a television production and advertising company. Her clients include ABC, NBC, CBS, Discovery Channel, TLC, History Channel, to name a few. Mrs. Gabriel is the founder of AmericanCongressForTruth.com, a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating millions of uninformed Americans about the threat of radical Islam to world peace and national security. She is a member of the Board of Advisors of the Intelligence Summit and lectures nationally and internationally on global terrorism. Mrs. Gabriel's expertise on the subject is sought after by world leaders and organizations. She has just returned from addressing the Prime Minister of Australia, Mr. John Howard, and she will be honored next week in Capitol Hill next Wednesday and is scheduled to address the British Parliament and House of Commons in October in London. She is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Because They Hate, a survivor of Islamic terror warns America. She is a regular guest and analyst on Fox News Channel, CNN, MSNBC, and various radio stations daily across the United States. Mrs. Gabriel is named one of the top 50 most prominent speakers in America by the Harry Walker Agency. She speaks 4 languages: Arabic, French, English, and Hebrew. Please help me welcome Ms. Brigitte Gabriel. Before we proceed to questions, I would first like to introduce Joint Force Staff College Commandant Major General Byron Bagby. Sir.
Well, thank you very much, Lance. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to take this opportunity to welcome you to the Joint Forces Staff College here in Norfolk, Virginia, and more specifically, welcome you to the Ike Skelton Library, where we are currently having this presentation. It is my pleasure to welcome Mrs. Brigitte Gabriel to the Joint Forces Staff College. Mrs. Gabriel's life experiences and insights, as reflected in Because They Hate, are extremely relevant to helping us understand and develop an understanding of the underlying factors motivating those who seek to engage us. Ms. Gabriel's career as a journalist and as a commentator has spanned over 3 decades. The wealth of information and perspective that she possesses highlights both her experiences in Lebanon and her rich understanding of affairs on the world stage. I am most impressed by her ability to speak 4 languages. She is multilingual, speaking Arabic, French, English, and Hebrew. I look forward to this afternoon's presentation. I'm also very pleased to welcome C-SPAN and the C-SPAN audience to Joint Forces Staff College in what I hope is the first of many visits in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome Ms. Brigitte Gabriel, and I'll now turn the stage back over to Lieutenant Colonel Landesh.
Okay, the ROE for today is I'll be pointing out the speakers, and we'll wait for the microphone, and please give a second for everybody to focus in on you. Brigitte?
Thank Thank you. I am honored and delighted to be here today, and I want to thank those who attended the morning lecture. It's wonderful to see you here again, coming back for more. I am honored. Thank you. The situation in the Middle East and the issue of global terrorism has become the issue of the 21st century. We in the civilized world rejoiced when we defeated Nazism, communism, and everything else that preceded in the 20th century. And we were looking forward to living a life of prosperity, of democracy that has spread throughout the world because of the efforts of the United States of America in bringing and establishing security throughout the world. Sadly, Islamofascism today threatens the survival of Western democracies across the globe. And they not only threaten our societies, but they are also threatening societies within the Middle East themselves. We have seen how they are not only attacking our interests, but the radicals have begun attacking Arab interests as well, such as the bombing they perpetrated on Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and such as the bombings that they have perpetrated in Jordan, in Amman, Jordan. I think the issue that is very important for us also to recognize and start paying attention to is what we used to think as Al-Qaeda is the only problem, Al-Qaeda is the only terrorist organization that is causing problems to the rest of us. That situation or that way of thinking needs to be changed, because what we learned just in the last 2 weeks in the United States, when we saw that the JFK plot had nothing to do with Al-Qaeda, the plot to blow up Fort Dix, or the attack against Fort Dix, had nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. So now we are seeing that we are fighting a radical ideology, not necessarily an organization. We can no longer point the finger to one organization and say, Al-Qaeda is responsible for creating terror across the world. That is not true. Al-Qaeda is an umbrella organization where many different organizations come underneath it, such as Hamas, such as Hezbollah, such as the Fatah, such as the many Jama'ah al-Islamiyya, al-Mujahideen, many different people that share the same ideology, and that is Islamofascism, and they have their eyes on the West. And before I open it to questions, I want to point out that as we discuss radicalism and Islamofascism, we are not generalizing against all Muslims. We all understand that there are 1.2 billion Muslims in the world today. Not all of them are radicals. The radicals are estimated to be between 15 to 25%. Now, 15 to 25% translates to 180 to 300 million people who have their eyes against the West and who are willing to become suicide bombers like Muhammad Atta. Silent majority are irrelevant at this point because it is the radicals that are creating problems. I look forward to entertaining your questions and answering any concern that you may have. And since we are short on time, I'd like to open it directly to questions.
Prior to World War II, Hitler had written Mein Kampf, and we had the Communist Manifesto, and both of those documents outlined, one, what Hitler would do if he came to power in Germany and how he would treat the Jews and others he considered to be the Untermenschen. And the Communist Manifesto talked about how communism would one day rule the world. Our current enemies today, whether they be Osama bin Laden with Al-Qaeda or Hamas or Hezbollah, they all have written documents where they talk about what they will do to both the Jews and the Christians if they are able to take over first states and then the world and reestablish Islam as the predominant force in the world. My question to you is, it appears that we have a lack of education in the U.S. today on what that threat to us really is. Do you agree with that? And then secondly, in your book, you have some recommendations on what we as Americans can do to help overcome this threat that we face today and help to keep our nation safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. Long question. So I'm going to try to remember everything. Yes, our enemy, they are telling us exactly what they want to do to the United States. I mean, when Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini came to power in 1979, it was Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini that invented the term America the Great Satan. Israel is the Little Satan. Iran since then have been supporting and propping up terrorist organizations around the world, but especially Hezbollah. Hezbollah in Lebanon was created by Iran. Ayatollah Khomeini looked at Lebanon. He realized we had 11 terrorist organizations, Islamic organizations. He merged them all into one because he realized the potential that he can have. So out of the 11, Hezbollah was created, and when Hezbollah bombed the Marines in Lebanon, Hezbollah was a one-year-old organization. Because America failed to deal with Hezbollah back then, now we are facing much bigger problems with much bigger enemy. Our enemy had tried to attack the United States for the last 20, 30 years. They repeatedly told us that they want to destroy the United States of America, that they want to attack our interests. We simply ignored their warning. When Hitler wrote his book, Mein Kampf, he explained exactly what he was going to do to the Jews. No one listened to him. They thought he's nuts, he's a crazy guy, who's going to listen to that? Nobody wanted to bother with Hitler. Hitler ended up dragging the whole world into war. And the whole world had to get involved. 60 million people died in World War II as a result. 14 million died were Christian in concentration camps, and 6 million only were Jews. So thank God for the Jews who keep the memory alive so we can remember the results of turning a blind eye to evil. Today, Iran is saying they want to wipe Israel off the map. Al-Zawahiri, in his last statement, he said, we want to create an Islamic Khalifa based in Iraq, and from there we want to export Islam throughout Europe and then to the United States. Our enemy repeatedly say what they want to do to us. We are burying our head in the sand and refusing to listen to their words, and we are justifying our action by trying to treat them according to our Western standards. They say what they want to do, we listen to it with our Western ears and say, they don't really mean that. Ahmadinejad will never wipe Israel off the map. He's not going to develop a nuclear bomb. You have people within our country who think that Ahmadinejad is developing a nuclear bomb simply for energy. And that is wrong. We saw yesterday the AIE report that came out. They estimate that Iran will have 8,000 centrifuges by December, by this December. And that is far more greater estimate than any of our intelligentsia was expecting and predicting even as back as 5 months ago. So we are realizing that the Iranians are pushing fast forward into their nuclear development plan. They will attack Israel if we do not stop them now before it is too late, and they will turn their eyes and attack the United States' interest. With Iran's nuclear development and their missile development, right now Iran just finished developing missiles that will reach Europe. Within 2 years, their latest missile is going to come out with a Shihab missile that's going to reach the east coast of the United States, will put New York and Washington, D.C. at risk. Back 5 years ago, if anybody would have said that to us about Iran, we would have laughed. We would have thought they're crazies. I mean, a bunch of mullahs in Iran, you know, they talk a hot talk, but they're going to never follow through. And here today, we're looking at Iran, the possibility by December having 8,000 centrifuges, which will allow them the capability of producing 200 to 300 nuclear bombs per year. That is a threat, and within 2 years, having the technology to reach the eastern shores of the United States, New York and Washington, D.C., that's a major problem. We must start listening to what our enemy is saying, and we must taking the action steps necessary to deal with the enemy. You mentioned the last part of my book where I discuss solutions. And the solutions are, when I make the case for the terrorist infiltration through our borders, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background because before I discuss solutions. When people, for example, hear of Hamas organizations, and I touched on that in the previous lecture for those of you who attended, but for those who did not come to the first lecture, when people hear of Hamas, for example, today and this week, Hamas is in the news, the civil war going on in the West Bank and the territories. Hamas, of all the terrorist organizations that have set up shop on American soil, the top 3 being Al-Qaeda, Islamic Jihad, and Hamas, Hamas has the largest infrastructure on American soil. Hamas has cells in over 40 states in the United States, including some of our most prominent cities, from New York to LA to Florida to Philadelphia, and all over the country from sea to shining sea. That's Hamas. Hamas, for example, mentioned in its charter, Article 22 of the Hamas Charter, they talk about enemy to be destroyed, and the enemy is the Freemasons, the Lion Clubs, the B'nai B'rith, and the likes, the Rotary Clubs. All of them are destructive espionage organizations to be destroyed. Now, that is a major problem for us because many people in this country do not know the facts. They're not educated because of political correctness, which I believe we need to take political correctness and throw it in the garbage where it belongs and start identifying the enemy and protecting our country. Hezbollah is coming to the United States through the Mexican border as well. Our government arrested 300 Hezbollah operatives on American soil in recent years. One of them was a general smuggled through the Mexican border. Al-Qaeda is working with the MS-13 gang, the notorious Mexican gang, in smuggling terrorists into the country. Al-Qaeda is paying between $25,000 to $50,000 per terrorist to be smuggled into the United States. Hezbollah is doing the same thing. Many organizations are doing the same thing. We need to shut down the borders. None of this nonsense talk about giving immunity to those who are here and, there is no problem, we cannot build a fence. Why not? Many other countries in the world have a fence. When our enemy is plotting our destruction and coming into our country, to operate within cells within our country, using our system against us. Those Al-Qaeda members and Hezbollah members who are coming into the United States, they are immediately going from the Mexican border into the major cities where there is large Islamic concentration in the United States, such as Dearbornistan, Michigan, LA, California, New York, Houston, Texas, Oklahoma City. They're blending in, they're marrying Islamic women who have American passports, who are American citizens. They're acquiring the citizenship this way and literally breeding terrorists on our soil. That is unacceptable. If people want to come to our country, there are many ways for them to come. What we are worried about right now is the terrorists using our system, our laws, our tolerance against us. They are coming here to do us harm. We are at a time of war. Our government must declare war. When we have terrorist cells within our country, when we have people who are illegal immigrants plotting our destruction, the JFK plot was the perfect example, and this only happened a week ago. The JFK plot was a plot done by one American citizen, and the rest of them were illegally here in the country for 20 years. Now, we have illegals who are getting jobs within sensitive information centers like airports, even if they are menial jobs, such as being, a luggage transporter. However, they are getting access to such important places where they can attack us and create havoc because they are gaining knowledge. I used an example also earlier when I was giving my lecture. One of our board members, Michael Cutler, that I work with. Michael Cutler has given at least 11 congressional testimonies on Capitol Hill. He works with the immigration, and he tells a story when they arrested one time a Pakistani immigrant to this country, an illegal immigrant, and supposedly he was working in the architecture, in the agricultural field, in the fields. And they were interviewing him, and they were talking with him, and they were saying about, what about, tell us how hard it is to work. He said, oh, I pick watermelon, I work, in the fields picking watermelons, it's very difficult. And Mike Cutler told him, well, tell me how difficult it is. What type of difficulties do you face? Of course, interrogating him to see what he's going to say. He said, those watermelon trees are so high, when I climb up sometimes just to cut down, it's so dangerous carrying that heavy watermelon down. Now, anybody that knows anything about how watermelon grows, we know that the watermelon do not grow on trees. And we know that our enemy right now is coming in, blending, getting jobs in the fields, working as dishwashers, working in laundromats, and that's how they're blending into the society. I write in my book, if you live in the United States today, you have exchanged money with a terrorist, you have shaken the hand of a terrorist, you maybe have sat next to a terrorist in a movie theater. They are already here, they are infiltrated within our society. Another point of the book is we need to throw political correctness in the garbage. We need to stop calling this war a war on terror. Since September 11th, our president and everybody talks about the war on terror. If you take Islam out of the war on terror, would we have a war on terror? And the answer is no. We would not have a war on terror. And we need to start identifying our enemy, and we need to start dealing swiftly with our enemy. We need to start monitoring mosques in our country. We have hate education going on in mosques in our country. The Freedom House, the Center for Religious Study, collected over 200 books and publications last year by going undercover into these mosques and collecting these books, which were provided by the government of Saudi Arabia in Arabic to Muslims living in the United States to teach Muslims living in non-Muslim land how to deal with infidels. In all these books and publications, these Saudi books, exhort Muslims to hate for Allah's sake, to not blend with the Christians, not to deal with the Christians, not to celebrate Christian holidays, not to wish people happy holiday. They teach that democracy is the source of all evils, and that words like democracy, equality, freedom is the cause of the world's problems, and they are unacceptable. That is wrong. They are teaching Muslims in the United States that it is the religious duty of every Muslim to impose a functionally Islamic government on every country in the world. This Islamic duty is binding a principle in law and in self-defense and as a commandment of jihad. And in order for them to fulfill this commandment of jihad, they must invade its western heartland, talking about whatever western country, including the United States, invade its western heartland, a struggle to make Islam supreme in the land. That is a problem, and we need to start paying attention to these things. Another question.
I appreciate your time here with us at the Joint Forces Staff College. A lot of the documents, this is kind of a follow-up question to the previous one. A lot of the documents that are being put out by radical organizations such as Hezbollah, Hamas, Al-Qaeda suggest that they have very expansionist motivations and goals for the world. You've mentioned in your book some things that we can do as Americans to protect ourselves domestically from this growing threat. As military members, we're trained and expected to think globally. What suggestions do you have for dealing with this problem from a foreign policy perspective on a global scale?
You mean politically, diplomatically, our government, or what the citizens of the United States can do?
Specifically, ma'am, foreign policy-wise, the posture we need to take as a nation, and if you could drill down even further, what we can do as the United States military to deal with this problem.
Well, the first thing we need to do with the United States military is remove the shackles from around the military generals' ankles so they can do their job. What we're seeing right now in Iraq is our great men and women are there. They are fighting to protect our country. But when we put our Marines on trial because one Marine acted immediately to save the lives of the other Marines when they are attacked, and the Marines are the ones who are put on trial, what type of message does that send to our Marines? We as Americans cannot fight a war to please our enemy and those who hate us to please their opinion of us. They're never going to like us no matter what we're going to do. When America was attacked in 2001, America was not in Iraq, America was not in Afghanistan. We know we had an enemy that was bent on killing us. The Taliban, like I mentioned in my earlier discussion in the early session, the Taliban, under the leadership of Bill Clinton, when we had a Democratic president in the United States, the Taliban trained 10,000 members in Afghanistan. Now, 10,000 members were not being trained for entertainment. 10,000 members were not being trained for the circus. 10,000 members were trained to attack the interest of the United States, attack United States bases, and declare jihad or holy war against the United States. And we go to war. First of all, we did not act swiftly with our enemy. The world was on our side, but because America acted wishy-washy in the beginning of the war, when we reacted, the world was watching our reaction, and especially our enemy. They already knew that America will not have the will nor the power to respond. Osama bin Laden made a statement after the bombing of the Marines in Lebanon in 1983. That lesson was not wasted on him. He said, we saw what America did after being attacked by Hezbollah. We knew that America is no longer the power it used to be. When America tucked tail between its legs and left, it sent a very bad message to our enemy that even though we may possess the biggest bombs in the world, we may be the biggest superpower in the world, however, we may have the power, but we do not have the will nor the resolve to respond. And until we get back the will that we had before World War II, when America was attacked in Pearl Harbor, until the nation gets back to the bases and we all come back together as one, not a Democrat, not a Republican. We need to throw these political affiliations on the side because terrorism and radical Islam is attacking America as America. I don't see any of the people that beheaded Daniel Pearl or Nick Berg stop for 1 second to ask them, are you a Democrat and are you a Republican? They killed them because they were Americans. So in our country, we need to put the bipartisan and all this I'm a that aside and come together as patriotic Americans to defend our country. And we need to have the resolve to stand together and say, we need to stand behind our military and let the military do what they're trained to do, and that is defend America and America's interest. We need to throw political correctness in the garbage. We need to let the military leaders make the decisions on what needs to happen in the war, not our elected officials sitting in Washington, D.C., like Nancy Pelosi, like the others who do not have a clue about what's happening in the Middle East. They are politicians, and they feel free to give our military generals orders as what to do and what to do in Iraq, and controlling the rules of engagement. They do not know their first basis when it comes to rules of engagement. Stay out of the military's business. What we need to do is let our military attack and deal swiftly with the enemy. And we cannot pander to public opinion in our enemy's state. We need to take care of what matters to America and what protect American lives and American interests. And if we are attacked, America should respond back regardless of who's attacked us. If any country is harboring terrorism, supporting terrorism, training terrorists on attacking the United States, we shouldn't go bomb one base like we did with Afghanistan. If the United States would have acted swiftly like we acted with Japan, with Afghanistan, today we would not be looking for Osama bin Laden. Today we would not be fighting the enemies we are fighting. Today all the other dictators and terrorists in the world would have taken notice and stepped back and said, we're not going to risk our destruction because America doesn't mince words. America had lost its backbone. And until America gets back that backbone, we're not going to win the war. In my book, I discuss not only what our government can do, because our governments make the laws. They make the laws about immigration, and this is why I discuss the immigration in detail. They make laws about monitoring our mosques. We need laws to stop the hate education that goes on in the mosques today. A man in a movie theater cannot scream fire without being arrested because he's creating chaos. How come the Muslims can teach hate education, enticing hatred and violence in their mosques in the United States, and they are not challenged or stopped by the United States government in the name of freedom of religion? Freedom of religion stops when you entice young Muslim American Muslims to teach them that Jews and Christians are apes and pigs because they adopted polytheism. They were cursed by Allah. They are teaching that if there is a Jew behind the tree, go and kill him. We cannot allow this hate education to continue in our country, not to mention what's happening in the mosques. Part of the tips we give to people about monitoring or getting involved as citizens. I created an organization called AmericanCongressForTruth.org to inform millions of uninformed Americans about the threat of radical Islam. And we detail, such as I detailed in my book, Because They Hate, I detail steps that the regular citizen can do. For example, any average citizen who are the eyes and ears of our government in their localities, no matter where that localities is. I tell them, if you see a mosque being built in your community and you are worried about suspicious activities happening in the mosque, go down to City Hall. Find out who owns the deed to that mosque. Is it a Saudi foundation? Is it names of some Islamic sheikh outside of the United States of America? Write those names down. It's public information for free. Write the information down. Come home. Call the FBI in your local community, turn the names to the FBI, and the FBI can start checking. Are these people on the most wanted list? Do they have links to terrorism? This is how we can help our government as citizens who may not have a lot of time to get involved, do something. Another thing, the brainwashing that's happening in our universities. You have seen the rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism on our college campuses. We have professors who are brainwashing our children, professors who are funded, supported, and paid by the government of Saudi Arabia, funneling millions of dollars into our universities, setting up Middle East study programs, Middle East study department, and political science department. Anybody in America over the age of 55 years old can take a university course free of charge. So we tell people, the average citizen who is retired, sign up to take a college course. The students cannot challenge the professors because they'll get bad grades. You have parents who work 2 jobs to spend their hard-earned money to send their kids to college to get an education. The students cannot risk failing that college course. But you as a private citizen who are attending the class, not to get a college degree, but to monitor the professors and what they're saying about America. If you are in a class where the professor is saying bad words about America, saying derogatory things about America and America's foreign policy and our allies in the Middle East, such as Israel, you challenge that professor. You stand up and set that professor straight. If that professor doesn't listen, you take him to the dean. If the dean doesn't listen, you take it to the press. We tell people, monitor newspapers, read newspapers. Anybody says anything bad about our country, you write that newspaper. You get your friends in your community to boycott that newspaper. Our students in American public schools today are not taught about the history of the United States. That needs to change. Those are only few of the points that I mentioned in the book. Any other question?
A few quotations out of your book I'd like to read and then ask you a question. In the section, Is Islam a Perfect Religion? You state, Muslims consider the Quran the Word of God and Muhammad the perfect model. For people who resist Islam, the Quran instructs in Surah 5, verse 33, their punishment is execution or crucifixion or cutting off hands and feet from the opposite sides, or to be exiled from the land. Islam commands that. Further down, quotation from Ayatollah Khomeini, the purest joy in Islam is to kill and to be killed for Allah. Then you ask the question, is that individual fanaticism, or is it simply being faithful to the Islamic teaching found in the Quran? And in your introduction, you point out that in the Muslim world, extreme is mainstream. To me, all of those things say that the Quran commands this sort of behavior, which to me would say that a faithful Muslim must do this. Given that, should we resist Muslims who want to seek political office in this nation?
What a great question. Absolutely. If a Muslim who is a practicing Muslim, who believes the word of the Quran to be the word of Allah, who abides by Islam, who goes to mosque and prays every Friday, who prays 5 times a day, this practicing Muslim who believes in the teachings of the Quran cannot be a loyal citizen to the United States of America. When push comes to shove, if we are faced with war, that Muslim's loyalty will always be to Islam and not to a foreign government. When you read the Quran, and a lot of this stems out of the Quran, and the Pentagon concluded a study last year where they said that the driving factor behind all terrorist activities in the world today is the Quran. Nobody had the guts to come forward and say that because nobody in this country has the courage to stand up and identify the problem out of fearing for their lives, out of fearing for their jobs, out of fearing to be boycotted or outcasted in the community as an Islamophobe, which is a tactic that a lot of the Muslim lobby in the United States would want you to hear. However, the problem stems from the Quran itself as it is written in the 7th century, as well as the accompanying books of the Quran, such as Al-Hadith, a lot of things in the Al-Hadith. The Al-Hadith is even worse than the Quran. And this is the problem that we are facing. A Muslim also, we have a law called taqiyya in Islam, taqiyya or kithman, which is lying or deception. A Muslim is allowed to lie and under any situation to make Islam or for the benefit of Islam in the long run. A Muslim sworn to office can lay his hand on the Quran and say, I swear that I'm telling the truth and nothing but the truth, fully knowing that he is lying because the same Quran that he is swearing on justifies his lying in order to advance the cause of Islam. What is worrisome about that is when we are faced with war and a Muslim political official in office has to make a decision either in the interest of the United States, which is considered infidel according to the teachings of Islam, and our constitution is incompatible with Islam, not compatible, the Muslim in office will always have his loyalty to Islam. And the shocking thing that the media completely overlooked, when Keith Ellison of Minnesota was elected as congressman, the shouts of Allahu Akbar that echoed through his victory party should have sent shivers down the spine of every American in this country to know how those words are used basically in Islam spreading through the world throughout the centuries. What people do not realize in this country, that under the banner of Islam, La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah, There is no God greater than Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. The Muslims murdered Jewish children in Israel. They massacred Christians in Lebanon. They killed Copts in Egypt, Assyrians in Syria, Hindus in India, Armenians in Turkey, and expelled over 900,000 Jews out of Arab land. And that was not done by minority radicals. That was done by governments. It was the governments of the Arabic world that expelled the Jews, even though they were members of society and they were productive members of their society. So in a time of war, when Muslims are fighting non-Muslims, non-Muslims cannot turn their back to any Muslim elected official in the White House. And this is why my personal opinion, as someone who comes from the Middle East, and I echo the voices of millions of people who fled the Middle East because of Islamic persecution, you cannot trust having a Muslim in office when he has to make a decision to either be loyal to the United States or be loyal to Islam.
Thank you. I'd like to point out that I'm an American soldier and practicing Muslim for 19 years, served the U.S. Army for past 19 years very proudly. For a previous point. Also, ma'am, your point of views, two questions. Are you a member of Hasbara Fellowship? And if it is, does that...
What's Hasbara Fellowship?
A fellowship in Israel? A organization?
No.
Okay. Okay, thank you, ma'am.
No.
Ma'am, thank you. Also related to your previous comment about not electing a Muslim, couldn't you then make the same claim for a Catholic, and their loyalties lie with the Pope and not with the country? And then are you then advocating the fact that we should have no religious affiliation for our politicians? And then a second follow-up, which ties to it. Yes, we're a nation at war. You said our government should declare war. But in your book, you also say that in a time of war, sometime we have to give up some of our freedoms. But this is the long war, and we're talking about a generational struggle. So after a generation of giving up our freedoms to fight this war, do we then become un-American? And so in our fight to keep America, we're no longer Americans at the end of the fight.
Well, that's a long question. Let me start with the first part of it. And what was the first part again?
Any religion.
Oh, yeah, I remember that question. Should we be careful in electing Christians to office? Christians who are elected in office, or Catholics, when a war is declared, they are not declaring taking over the land like what we are seeing right now happening under Islam. Islam does not accept any other religion. You can put a Catholic in office, and that Catholic in office will be the first person to fight for the right of every Muslim to have a mosque in our land in the United States. Because we as Christians and Jews respect other people's religion, do not want to enforce our laws on our other people. However, we have seen repeatedly, and especially in the Middle East, that Islam rules supreme. Whenever the majority of the radicals get together, like Saudi Arabia, like other Arab Gulf states, like any country where they have elections, for example, in Hamas, they elected Hamas in Gaza and the territories. We have seen the shift from Fatah, who is a little bit more moderate, into Hamas instituting Sharia law and discussing Sharia law and even bringing back the jizya on the Christians in the Gaza territory. The ideology of the two religions are completely different. Islam is not in any land to be equal to any other religion. When Islam takes over, Islam is in the land to control other religions. And you have seen that in Saudi Arabia. How many churches do we have in Saudi Arabia? How many churches do we have in Bahrain? How many churches do we have in Egypt? Do you know that in Egypt, even though there are the Copt Christian and they are the largest second block of Christians outside of Lebanon, do you know that the Copts in Egypt, in order for them to fix a faucet in a bathroom in a church, they have to get a presidential approval, which can take up to 30 years. So as you see, mixing in Islam, the religion is the state and the state is the religion. In Christianity, no Christian would allow that. Catholics will not allow that. Nobody will allow that. We want separation of church and state in this country. Even the Christians would argue that out of respect. They might want to have their own born-again Christian schools or their own Catholic schools, but they're not forcing you to adopt and enforcing their curriculum on Arabic public schools. Today, in any public school in the United States, you cannot discuss the Bible or dress people like Jesus and Mary and take them to church as a field trip for the class. However, in many Islamic public schools, in many public schools in the United States today, children are forced to read the Quran for 3 weeks, dress in Islamic hijab, go to the near local mosque for a visit with hijabs on their heads, especially for the girls, and take their shoes off before they go into the mosque. Now, if we cannot allow the Christian students to go visit churches as a field trip and read the Bible as a discussion for 3 weeks and dress up like Mary and Joseph, how come we allow Muslim students to do that? See how the difference between Christianity and Islam when it comes to law? In Islam, the church is the state and the state is a religion. There is no difference. To the second part of your question about giving up our freedoms. In a time of war, you must give up some freedoms in order to protect society in general. We can do diversity quilts and sing Kumbaya from now until the cows go home. The reality is, we have an enemy living in our country who plots our destruction. We know we have people who are trying to get on airplanes or try to smuggle weapons on airplanes because they want to blow us up to smithereen. You didn't see any resistance from any Americans when we all line up when we were traveling, taking our shoes off, putting our computer in a box, taking our jackets off so we can ensure that everybody gets home safely. You didn't see any American complain about this. We are all willing to do our part in order to protect our country in the long term. I look Middle Easterner, look at me. If anybody wants to profile me, be my guest. If anybody wants to pull me to the side, be my guest. As a patriotic American, I am willing to give up whatever time is required, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, to be inconvenienced, to ensure that I and every single one of you who are accompanying me on any airplane or any train will get to our destination and to our loved ones safely and securely, to ensure safety in our country. And if you hear anybody who is not willing to speak or do the things I'm willing to do, we better watch out. This is that we need to see more patriotism and less terrorism, and especially on the part of the Islamic community in this country, who are good at nothing but complaining about every single thing instead of standing up and working with us in fighting the enemy in our country. We have terrorist cells within our country. When our government wants to institute an eavesdropping program to monitor these phone calls, they're not monitoring your phone call and my phone call discussing the Easter menu or the Hanukkah menu. They are monitoring phone calls of enemy outside of this country, calling terrorist cells in this country to find out what is happening. I would much rather give the right to my government to do so as an American instead of see the city of New York go up in flame in a biological bomb where 12 million people are dead. Yes, I am willing to see something sacrificed until we win this war on Islamofascism. Now, do I believe in the short term we're going to win this war? No. Why? Because of political correctness. People in America are so used to such a nice life, they want to bury their head in the sand and ignore the fact that there is a war being waged against us. Everybody would much rather watch American Idol, Survivor, The Sopranos than watch a documentary about the Middle East on prime time. And that is the sad reality. And we're only going to wake up when some of our cities, hopefully only one, hopefully Osama bin Laden will not follow through on his threat of a second Hiroshima in the United States, where he identified how he's going to attack the United States in multiple attacks simultaneously on different cities in a disaster to kill 4 million people. Hopefully we will wake up before we get to that point. But I can assure you, if you see 9 American cities go up in flame because of a nuclear attack or biological attack, watch how fast every single American will be so willing to put all their freedom and all their sensitivity training aside to save our country. Next question.
Ma'am, again, thank you for coming. You touched on this a little bit earlier. It seems the civility of our political discourse has deteriorated significantly in the last few years. The media, as the American citizenry, seem to be less and less able to tell the difference between entertainment and news, sometimes panders to this. Do you think we need to hold the media as a primary information conduit more accountable for identifying controversy versus straight news, and hold them more accountable when someone makes a statement clearly beyond the bounds of the pale, that's clearly false, into perhaps a better editorial policy? And what role do you think that plays in building U.S. support for what needs to be done?
Oh, absolutely. You know, sadly, the media, the mainstream media in this country is working against us. I mean, all Osama bin Laden has to do is open up the New York Times. He'll find out America's secrets on the front page of the New York Times. I mean, we all know how we lost track of Osama bin Laden because he found out that we were monitoring him through his cell phone, threw that cell phone away, and we lost him. Thank God for the blabbermouths New York Times, which jeopardized our operation. The same thing with the financing, with the monitoring of their terror financing. The New York Times comes out with a story how we are monitoring banks throughout the world and working with different banks and institutions to monitor how the flow of funds. I mean, that is suicidal to have supposedly a press in this country who are exposing our government's secret. Again, we are at war. Loose lips sink ships. And what we're seeing right now is the loose lips of the media, and anything that our government is doing is jeopardizing our operation. The media is acting on the side of our enemy instead of our side. We need to have more control as to and prosecute those who leak. And the prosecution and the consequences should be so strong and so swift that no reporter will endanger the United States of America or its citizen in order to sell his soul, to win an award, and to expose a story. That is a problem. But again, American people can make a difference by basically boycotting those publications. Money talks. If you advertise, if you are a small business owner and you buy advertisement in the New York Times, cancel that advertisement. Tell the New York Times, I will take my advertising dollar and spend it somewhere else because you are jeopardizing my country. And I'm just using the New York Times as an example. I can say the Miami Herald, I can say the LA Times, I mean, name all the mainstream media. And speaking of mainstream media, when the cartoon controversy last year, I mean, here is the largest news story of the 21st century. The cartoon controversy where thousands of people were injured, hundreds of people were killed, supermarkets were vandalized, churches were burned, embassies were destroyed. And nobody in our supposedly freedom of press media had the guts to show the cartoons, to even discuss them. We already lost our freedom of the press in this country. Yet, however, because we are so nice and we allow them, because our freedom of our democracy, because we are in the United States, to say whatever they want to say, they feel free to publicize important information about our government, knowing that there will be no consequences to pay. But if they publicize the cartoons of Muhammad, they will be beheaded, despite the fact they live in America. So fear and intimidation runs supreme in our news media. The other problem with our news media is Saudi petrodollars is buying our news media, just like they're buying the banking systems, just like they're buying the entertainment industry. They are buying shares in the media, and they are controlling the media, from AOL to Fox News. I mean, look at Prince Bandar Bil Talal bought 5% shares of Fox News channel, so it's 5% less balanced than it usually is. This was a year and a half ago. And he was bragging about it when he was speaking in Bahrain. This was after the French riots in France, and how Fox News put on the Muslim riots in France. And he was bragging how he called Murdoch and told Murdoch, this is not Islamic riots, you need to put youth riots. He said within half an hour, the title on Fox News was changed to youth riots. Now, he was bragging about his control and accomplishment against the American media. We need people in the American media who love this country to start speaking the truth, and those who do not to be punished for not speaking the truth. And we need to be able to allow radio talk show hosts to be able to express their opinion and debate the issues. Right now, look what happened to Michael Graham with ABC News a year and a half ago, when he was fired simply for making a statement about Islam and accusing that terrorism right now is associated with Islam. ABC News and WMEL in DC ended up firing him. Now, as long as we have this culture of political correctness, we're not going to be able to win this war. And that's what it boils down to. And that's what it boils down to. Did I forget another part to the question? I'm trying to think. That was it? Okay, great.
Well, Ms. Gabriel, I want to thank you very much, speaking for the entire Joint Forces Staff College staff, faculty, and students, for coming over and spending your afternoon with us. And I have a small token of appreciation to you,
this is great.
one of the Joint Forces Staff College coins. And
Thank you.
Those of us here at Joint Forces Staff College play a key role in developing joint officers, and we educate officers along 3 primary areas: joint, multinational, and interagency. And in doing so, we practice academic freedom, and that allows us to create officers who are strategically minded, critical thinkers, and skilled warfighters. And ma'am, thank you very much for helping us this afternoon.
Thank you for your service. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's discussion on Because They Hate, and it's the last installment of the Islam elective at Joint Force Staff College. Again, thank you for coming, and thank you, Ms. Gabriel.
Brigitte Gabriel is founder of the American Congress for Truth. For more, visit AmericanCongressForTruth.org.